Continue talking about adjustment layers. So some of the other adjustment layers that we have at our disposal would be beneficial to kind of unpack and learn. The next one that we're going to talk about is Vibrance. Now here we have our Vibrance adjustment layer, and if we click on that, we can see that there's two sliders in the properties panel, Vibrance and Saturation. So there's an interesting way that both of these sliders work in unison rather than individually to create an interesting image. So if I just drag the saturation slider all the way to the right, you can see that what is happening is that these colors are going more towards a primary. The image's color here in the clouds is getting closer to red, and the sky is getting closer to blue, and it is brightening up in terms of its overall tone. I'm going to bring that down to 0 here. Now if we go to the Vibrance, we can see that what Vibrance does, and look what happens, it gives us a non-linear separation of color, and that produces more color in our image. So if there's any image that looks a little flat or flattened out, then you can actually use Vibrance to add a little bit more color than is already there. So this is really interesting for this effect because we can subtly bring in some more color variation by adding Vibrance. Now here, if I go to saturation, we can see that now we're starting to, here at 0 or negative 100, it's all black and white. Here at 0, it's lacking a little pop. And then it's just about using these in tandem with each other that'll really bring out something special in our image. Now, the interesting part about this is that I can use this in addition to a curve adjustment layer here, where I'm bringing out some overall exposure and making sure my histogram is looking good here at the same time. Bringing that in, and I'm just problem solving this photograph with you. Now I can check my overall before and after and see if I'm option clicking on the bottom here, and I've added a lot of pop, and I want to bring out a certain part of some contrast in this image, but not too much. Also want to dial the Vibrance down just a little bit here from where I was because it's starting to look a little fake. And so now here I can see my overall before and after in this photograph. Now to continue on, I can add an additional adjustment layer or that affects the color, or I can go into my curves adjustment and go into the individual channels of color. But let me show you, just for the sake of learning, the way that you would do that with a separate adjustment layer. Here, if I go to the color balance, you can see that I'm, in a sense, doing what curves gives us by affecting the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights in the cyan red channel, the magenta green channel, and the yellow blue channel. So in this way you can really get some interesting effects with manipulating these images. Here, if I these channels of color, if I bring in more reds in the shadows, here, if I go to the highlights and affect those, adding more red here. So for me, I'm just changing the overall color. Here's our before, and then here is our after. You can see that right now I feel like I have a little bit too much warmth in the shadowed areas, so I'm going to bring that back just a little bit here. But I'm liking the other changes that we're getting, and I'm going to continue doing that. So now we have our overall before and then our overall after. We've made this image pop. We've changed the overall exposure, and we can do it just a little bit more just to bring in some more detail that might be hiding behind some of these shadows there. Okay, and so if we check each of our layers, we can see that we've kind of problem solved our way through this image and made something that looks more interesting and tells a really interesting story.